continue working on the meaning of loyalty, but I shall spare you the experience of listening to a restatement of our basic proposition. Today and perhaps for next Sunday, I shall have to continue this. I want to apply the theory upon which we have been working for these 5 weeks to one who seems to me to be perhaps the greatest of all of the prophets of Israel. The theory was applied last Sunday to Job, and today we shall apply the theory to Deutero-Isaiah, to the second Isaiah, to the Isaiah whose writing begins at chapter 40 in the book of Isaiah. I shall go as far with it as seems healthy this morning, and then pick it up next Sunday. I want to read a little from this really tremendous personality. That after I'll skip around through these 26 chapters just for 3 or 4 minutes, that you may get a flavor. He opens by saying, "Console my people." I'm using Moffat's translation. The King James translation says, comfort ye my people," and that's beautiful and so beautiful and so inspired that any other translation seems to be a sacrilege. But now that I have said that, you don't have to say it to yourselves. You can listen. Console my people, console them. This is the voice of your God. Speak to Jerusalem tenderly. Proclaim to her that her hard days are ended, her guilt paid off, that she has received from the Eternal's hand full punishment for all her sins. Up to the high hills, O herald of happiness to Zion. Raise your voice loudly, O herald of happiness to Jerusalem. Raise it fearlessly and tell the towns of Judah, here is your God. Here is the Eternal coming in power, maintaining mightily his cause. Then he asks a question about Cyrus, who's doing a lot of things up north that I shall be telling you about in a minute. Who roused up from the east the man whom victory ever attends? Who lets him have nations as a gift and lays kings low before him? His sword drives them like dust, his bow like chaff before the wind. He chases them and passes forward safely, swiftly with feet that never touch the ground. Who brought this about? Who did it? 'Twas he who summons the generations from the beginning. 'Twas I, the Eternal, I who am the first and at the last the same. And then he calls him by name here. Thus the Eternal, the true God, hails Cyrus, whom he consecrates, whose right hand I have grasped, to terrify nations, to open doors before him, to keep gates from being closed. And then after Babylon has fallen, down with you, sit in the dust, O maiden Babylon. No throne for you now, sit on the ground, Lady Chaldea. Never shall you again be dainty and delicate. Grind meal at the hand mill, off with your veil. Strip your skirts, unbear your thighs, wade through the streams, for I am taking vengeance. I will not relent, says our deliverer. So listen to this, you luxurious creature, lolling at your ease, thinking to yourself, I am supreme. Never shall I be widowed, never suffer loss of children. Both sorrows shall befall you in a moment, in one day, widowhood and loss of children. They are on you suddenly, in spite of all your spells and mighty magic, though you feared nothing in your tyranny, thinking that no one saw you. It was your magic craft and cunning that misled you, till you thought to yourself, I'm supreme. Therefore shall evil assail you, that you know no spells to evade, and mischief shall befall you. You cannot ward it off from you. And then in Jerusalem, why was there no one when I came? No one to answer when I called? Think you my hand is too weak to deliver, that I have no power to release you? With one word of rebuke I dry the sea, I turn streams into desert lands, till the fish shrivel for the lack of water, and the sea creatures gasp and die for thirst. I shroud the skies in mourning and cover them with sackcloth. Sounds a little like Job that I was reading last Sunday, doesn't it? And then, let me skip over to the part that we Behold, my servant Israel shall rise. He shall be raised on high, as many were appalled once at his fate, king shuddering at his doom. Who could have believed their cry? What we have heard, whoever had the eternal's power so revealed to them? Why, Israel of old grew like a sapling, like a shoot springing from dry soil. He had no beauty to attract our eyes, no charm to make us choose him, disfigured till he seemed a man no more, deformed out of the semblance of a man. He was despised and shunned by men, a man of pain who knew what sickness was. Like one from whom men turned with shuddering, he was despised. We took no heed of him. And yet ours was the pain he bore, the sorrow he endured. We thought him suffering from a stroke at God's own hand. Yet he was wounded because we had sinned. 'Twas our misdeeds that crushed him. 'Twas for our welfare that he was chastised. The blows that fell to him have brought us healing. Like sheep, we had all gone astray. We had each taken his own way. And the Eternal laid on him the guilt of us all. He was ill-treated, yet he bore it humbly. He never would complain. Dumb as a sheep led to the slaughter, dumb as a ewe before the shearers. They did away with him unjustly. And who heeded how he fell, torn from the land of the living, struck down for sins of ours? They laid him in a felon's grave and buried him with criminals, though he was guilty of no violence, nor had he uttered a false word. But the Eternal chose to vindicate his servant, rescuing his life from anguish. He let him prosper to the full in a posterity with life prolonged, and so forth. Now, the fundamental proposition, as it has bearing on the theme that we've been considering for many weeks now, is this. Here is a man who is dedicated in his personal and professional life, for he's a prophet, to the restoration of his homeland that had been destroyed by captivity. Very simple. A man who has a rather intense nationalistic feeling, but a feeling that is a part of the soil, a part of the land itself. But the land is a symbol of the soul of his people in a rather interesting way. But that's how he starts. He begins with a fierce loyalty to a place, you see. And then, as we watch it, that loyalty begins to expand. It's interesting how a commitment opens up more and more of its relations, its involvements, until we land way over here, whereas we started way over at this point. So this feeling that he has for Jerusalem, the restoration of Jerusalem, begins to take the form of the feeling for the restoration of the temple. What is it that makes Jerusalem significant? It is the temple. So we watch him go through that process. And then the restoration of the temple, well, you can't have Jerusalem restored, you can't have the temple restored unless the people go back. And they can't go back unless they're released. And they can't be released unless there's a change in politics. So he becomes interested in politics, and the change in politics. In order that the people may be released, in order that they may go back to Jerusalem, in order that the temple may be restored. Now let's work at it a little. Deutero-Isaiah was a very cultivated and cultured man, a man of refinement, a man who came from the kind of economic security that enabled him to travel, and to travel not on any mission particularly, but just to travel. And he saw many things. And one of the things that he saw was that all over the world that he traveled, he saw Jewish people scattered. And that fact becomes a very important fact in the unfolding of this concept that begins to work on his mind. Babylon had destroyed Jerusalem and taken the people into captivity. And now Prophet Ezekiel is gone. The prophet Deutero-Isaiah emerges on the horizon with a concern about the restoration of his homeland. And while this is brooding in his mind and in his spirit, way up north, a young man whose name is Cyrus begins to make rather amazing conquests. And the last stronghold that he faced was the stronghold that was presided over by Croesus, the man who, by tradition, was the richest man who's ever lived. And Croesus, out of his comfort and his secure insecurity, said, this little upstart, Cyrus, he isn't even dry behind the ears. We don't have to do anything about him. And while he was thinking that, Cyrus, who wasn't dry behind the ears, but was strong and a good warrior and a good leader, laid siege to the kingdom, and the great kingdom fell, and then, of course, everything began falling in his hands. And the prophet looking out on the horizon, seeing that, he said, that is the finger of God. I know that he has not bowed his knee before Israel's God. But all of life belongs to God, and this movement in history that we see before our eyes is a movement of the God of history, even though the instrumentality is not one that is self-consciously related to God. It's an interesting kind of thinking, isn't it? See what he's saying? Cyrus doesn't know he's God's agent, but God is a God of history, and every significant movement in history is a part of the divine process. So one of the ways by which God reveals himself as being involved in the historical process is by a circling series of mighty events. And one of these events is the march of Cyrus. And it is related to the fate of Israel, says this prophet. So he says it won't be long now before Cyrus will take Babylon on. And when he takes Babylon on, then that country that conquered Israel will now be conquered. And since Cyrus has no interest in us, I'm sure that if we can make the right kind of presentation to him, Cyrus will give us permission to go back. For if Babylon behaved as it did towards us and he breaks the back of Babylon, then of course one of his simple psychological bits of behavior will be to undo what Babylon has done. Very simple. So Cyrus will let us go back home. And when Cyrus did conquer Babylon, he let them go back, but he didn't give them their autonomy. And I'll be through with the classroom aspect of this in a minute. You're very patient. He did not give them their autonomy. He let them go back, but he let the status quo remain pretty much as it was. That is, there was a head man representing Cyrus over everything. But despite that fact, the prophet was greatly inspired, because he said, at least we are permitted to go back. And then the call went forth. Remember now, the restoration of Jerusalem is the thing with which he starts. Now hold that in mind, and you'll see where we go. And he felt, you see, that his concern was the concern of all of Israel. That in all parts of the world, wherever these people were scattered, and also in Babylon in particular, where they had been held captive, that once the ban were lifted, that the roads and the highways would be full of people rushing back to restore Jerusalem. And when his call went forth, and everybody knew they could go back, what do you think happened? Just a handful went back. I mean, you're all comfortable in Babylon. You'd settled down. You had a little. You'd had some security. You found out that this captivity wasn't so terrible because there'd been a little margin for juggling, and you had gotten into that. And now pull up and go back to Jerusalem, and this place is desolate, and the jackals and all kinds of things there, and not any good food, and the water is bad, and so we won't do that. And the prophet said, I don't believe it. Is my interest in the rebuilding of Jerusalem, which seems to me to be a part of my commitment and Israel's commitment to God, and is the center of my loyalty at this point, is that wrong? Am I mistaken? Have I been misreading the thing? For if it is true that this is the will of Jehovah, would not Jehovah have inspired in these fellow Israelites, these fellow Judahites, the same kind of concern and agitation for freedom to rebuild the homeland that I have experienced? Where did I miss it? Well, I don't know, but I missed it. I will go. And he went. And he went along with the others. And when he got there, he said, I know that these people who've come, they have come because the root of the matter is in them. They will build. And he found that those who were there, many of them, had no interest in the rebuilding of Jerusalem. They were trying to get their private lives straightened out. They were trying to make all kinds of personal adjustments to the experiences and the exigencies of the moment. And they had no time to talk about the restoration of some city because of some vague and dim interpretation of an ultimate destiny of Israel. What is this man talking about? So once again, he said, am I wrong again? And then he made one of the great discoveries. And it was very hard for him to make it. And that discovery was this, that all the Israelites, all the Judahites, because they were the sons and daughters of Abraham, because they had been involved in the miraculously significant movement of Jehovah upon the minds and hearts of these people, giving to all of them in some rather radically gross sense, a sense of participation in a collective destiny with reference to the fulfillment of the meaning of life for all mankind, that all of these people, despite the fact that they were involved in this process, could not be regarded as being morally sensitive to its meaning. And he makes a distinction then between those of the house of Israel who are responsive to the mind and the Spirit of God, and those who are not. And he addressed his appeal to those who are morally sensitive and responsive, and he had to say to those others that they were just as people who had never been exposed to the movement of the mind and the Spirit of God in this private or collective sense. Then he found that to build the temple would be one way by which, on the moral realm, he could match the thing that was happening on the national and international political realm. Now let's see what he said, because his times are very much like our own. That here was this Cyrus moving, knocking national heads together, getting one world bound together politically under one dominant master. And what the prophet saw in that was the way in which that political fact provided a climate in which the ethical and spiritual concept of one God could be operative. Do you see? So he said, how can it be? How can I get it? I have not the power to set up some great theocratic state that would run along parallel with this political state. I remember what I saw when I traveled as a young man. Scattered all over the world were these little groups of Jews and individual Jews who had come out of Jerusalem. Now, said he, if the temple can be restored, even if it's restored in a waste place, if the temple can be restored, then all of these scattered Jews may come back and redefine their sense of ethical and spiritual mission. Then they can go forth throughout all the world, having learned the skills and the techniques of adjusting themselves in foreign environments, knowing the languages, knowing all about the customs and the habits and the psychology of all these different kinds of people. Now, if they have this mission, they can move all over the world as a vast, creative manifestation individually of the Spirit of God, and bottom the political movement with the moral and the spiritual insight. Tremendous thing. And then he discovered that they weren't interested in that. Again, it's practically too difficult. And then he became depressed. He said, there is no point in my working at this. I've been shifted from position to position. First, the restoration of Jerusalem. No, I'm a voice alone. And then the rebuilding of the temple. No. And with the hope that this vision that I've felt that God wanted Israel to fulfill. No. And he did what we often do. When I was a boy, there was a song that we sang often on the first Sunday in the month. And the phrase went something like this, that if Satan says, I don't have any grace, I will take him back to the starting place. The idea that even though the present may be very dark and meaningless and insignificant, if you can go back to the beginning and go all over the way, you will find that strength will come from experiences that in the past. So the prophet went back in the experience of God and Israel, the captivity, the release from Egypt, all the rest of it, and he began to give words of comfort to himself, really, and the comfort that he gave to himself was so significant and far-reaching that it spilled over and became comfort to the other people. And then he moved from the necessity of building Jerusalem, the temple, the training of emissaries to go out to redeem the world, to the greatest single, in my judgment, to the greatest single moral and spiritual discovery in all the literature of religion. And what is that discovery? It is this: that perhaps the true function of Israel, the moral significance of life, is not to be measured in terms of power, in terms of status, in terms of respectability, in terms of prestige-bearing moments, in terms of the accumulation of wealth or training or skills. But the true moral grandeur of life is to be found in humility of spirit and of mind. Humility of spirit and of mind. And if somehow Israel is willing to become humble, then it will discover that humility can never be humiliated. That if a people can relate themselves to the destiny of the race of mankind in terms of the meaning and the significance of their witnessing as to the meaning of life and the meaning of God, then wherever people anywhere, whatever may be their language or culture or faith, wherever they move in that direction, they will move through a light which you saw